Had this big chunk of lilac. It was sort of a crotch, and I've been wanting to use the woodworm, and I thought I would do a quick little bowl. Here's how the woodworm works. It really is just screwed on, and then it presses against the milled surfaces of the dovetail portion of your jaw. And then I will reverse this bowl and use the Mortise Attachment, same jaw, just without the woodworm in the middle. So here it is, just a small piece of the lilac. The most important part about using that woodworm, honestly, is to have a flat face. The bearing portion of the woodworm attachment is really the machined part of the dovetails on the four jaws, not the screw. The screw is just merely something that centers it and that draws it tight up against those surfaces. But those surfaces are what you're relying on to keep the piece of wood from wobbling, and so you want a flat surface. So once I had flattened both the front and the back of this, because I hadn't decided which end of it I was going to use yet, I was able to then, because I had a center marked on both sides, make that decision, put the woodworm inside of the jaws, and it's cool how it just sits in there. It's got four little flats on it that go up against the four jaw portions of the Nova chuck, so that it is held from spinning, and it's held dead center in the chuck. And so it uses at least on mine, a 5/16 hole. You just drill the hole in the centerpiece of your piece of wood with a 5/16 drill, and it's only about, not even, maybe an inch deep, which I had plenty of room on this. Even though this piece of wood looks small, I had plenty of room. I was going to drill out the center of this little mini bowl once I'd turned it over. So the hole that you create for the woodworm is going to all be carved away sooner or later. So you put the little worm screw in the center of the chuck and tighten it down. Again, the four jaws of the chuck grab around it tightly, and it is held in sort of a little notch so that it doesn't want to pull back out of the chuck. And it's really a secure, a pretty cool little deal. So once you've drilled that hole in the wood, you just thread this chuck back onto your lathe and start trying to turn your piece of wood onto that screw. And I must admit, it was a very tight fit because this lilac was very hard. I maybe could have used another 32nd of an inch wider hole, but I was able to get it started. And even though it seems wobbly, it really will straighten itself out. And as you draw it, again, the beauty of it is it's not relying on the screw or even the straightness of your hole. It's relying on the fact that you've got a flat surface on the piece of wood, and the tops of those dovetail portions of your jaw are machined flat. So if you draw the wood right up against those jaw portions, and I found it easier, honestly, to hold the wood and turn the chuck like I'm doing here with a wrench. And once those surfaces meet up against the flat portion of that wood, it's on there dead straight, and it really works like a million. Then I was able to work on the bottom, what would become the bottom of the bowl. And I was able to then, with a small tool, cut a mortise in the bottom of the bowl that I would then be able to reverse the wood, take the woodworm out of the chuck, and expand those dovetail portions into the mortise I cut in the bottom of this bowl. And again, as in the flat surface being important for the woodworm, a flat surface is also important inside that mortise, because just like on the flip side, what keeps it square and straight with the world are the top surfaces of those dovetail sections of your jaw going up against a flat recess that you've cut as a mortise. Maybe a good way to show that is just this quick little illustration. You can see it's just touching the tops of those. There's a gap there between the body of, you could say, the body of the jaw and the bottom of the bowl. There's a gap there because all the mating surface is the tops of those dovetail portions. So I don't know if that helps at all, but here's another little view of that. Again, what's important is what I've colored in green, that piece be flat, because the green that I'm showing on that are machined flat. And so if you press that all the way in and then expand the jaw, you get a very flat, square, non-wobbling surface. And again, you can see there's a gap there. So once I had turned that around, I was able to work on what would become the bottom of the bowl. There it is. I just turned that around. You saw the woodworm sticking out of there, and there it is. It's basically been turned around now. I'm using the mortise that I cut. I was able to work on the bottom of the bowl freely, get a good flat mortise cut. Here I am drilling out. This is a pretty shallow bowl. And it actually turned out to be a pretty good looking bowl, but I was able to now drill out that area where the 5/16 hole was drilled for the woodworm is now completely gone because I've drilled it out. And I'm going to take my tool and actually make it even bigger. I was able to round the inside edges of the hole that I drilled in this bowl to kind of mimic the round outside surface of the bowl. And so once I'd done that, I was able to do some sanding. This piece of lilac had some cracks in it, and you'll see here in a minute that I used a black CA glue, and I'll have a link to that at the bottom of here, that worked really slick in filling these small cracks. These weren't big cracks, they were pretty small, and so it didn't take much filler to fill them in uniformly in black. So once I'd gotten it fairly close to where I wanted it, I was able to, first I kind of slathered on a coat of shellac just in order to kind of seal up the grain and make the grain maybe behave a little bit better as far as tear out was concerned. And then here's it's a medium density, you could call it a medium body black CA glue, and it's got just a tiny little applicator, and it's really slick for just putting it into tiny cracks. And it'll flow down in there and fill that crack up, so you're getting kind of a double use out of this. It's filling the crack with something that's black that looks nice when you've turned it and finished it. And on top of just filling it, you're filling it with CA glue, which is very strong glue, which will in turn hold the crack together. I was pretty liberal with it because of the shellac I'd put on the wood and the fact that I was going to still turn it smooth. You can be kind of messy because you're going to just cut it right back off with your tools and sandpaper, and it's only going to show down in the crack. So it's a good product. It's much easier to use than mixing a two-part epoxy for something this tiny. I bought this CA glue just for the purpose of hairline cracks, which there are plenty of, and it works great to fill a hairline crack. It's just liquid enough that it flows down into the crack, but it's just thick enough that it doesn't completely run down and out the side and down onto the floor. It's pretty easy to use and it behaves well. Once I'd gotten that to the shape I wanted. I just took some sandpaper to it. Started with some 80 grit, went down to 120 grit, then 220 grit. I think I even on this one went as far as 320 grit. I shellacked it another time, or even two, and then continued to sand until I got what was a very smooth feel from just the shellac and sandpaper. And then I put a final coat of shellac on, let that harden up, gave that a sanding, and then on top of that I went with a paste wax. Here I'm using a random orbit sander. I think it just felt like it was easier and took the wood off faster. I was able to get it down to a smooth feeling that seemed to satisfy the need at the time. So here it is, pretty much ready for the final coat of finish, and I'm just going to do this kind of at normal speed so you can see how great looking this lilac is once you get it wet. It had so much interesting grain. It was such a nasty crotch of wood that there were branches popping out of it and different grain colors all over the place, and it just made for a very nice marbled kind of a finish. And so it's kind of always nice. This is always the most satisfying part of turning something, is to the first coat of something wet, so you can see what this wood is really going to look like once it has a finish on it. And so I was very liberal putting the shellac on, because I'm going to sand it down almost completely off to get it to where it's just sort of a satin kind of a smooth surface. And then that seems to work well with paste wax that I put on with the piece spinning and sort of almost burnish it in. And you get a nice, I think, a nice finish that feels good in your hand. It's not glossy and phony looking, but it's not flat and dull looking. It's just right. And it feels good to the touch, and it looks good from a distance. And it really accentuates the very interesting grain and all the stuff that was going on in this little piece of lilac. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If so, please subscribe, and thank you very much for watching.